Hello, everyone. Welcome to Building the Best Webinars. This is a webinar that I've personally been very excited to teach pretty much since I started AFCPE, and I'm really excited to get to deliver today. I have a question. What is my name? My name is Summer Red. I am the Professional Development Manager at AFCPE, and I've been doing financial education for about 8 years now, and I'm very passionate about it, which I think was going to come through during this webinar. Okay, so we're going to get right into it, but please, if you have any questions, ask a lot of questions in the chat box. I pay a lot of attention to the chat box, and I'll answer questions as they come up. So, first question. How many CEUs do you get for this webinar? Please type your answer in the chat box. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of answers that are varying. Wow, Brian Lomax is super hopeful. The answer is none. We actually are not giving CEUs for this webinar because it's not about finances or counseling specifically. And I really wanted to emphasize that at the start so that if you feel like you now need to leave, then you can do that. Okay? So, again, no CEUs. Hopefully you're here for the knowledge and the information, which I'll have in abundance. We're going to have a lot of practical tips provided here. And if anyone's ever looked at my webinar and said, ooh, that's pretty, I'm going to tell you where you find these pictures for free. Okay? So, true or false? Most webinars are boring. Leslie is very nice. I appreciate that. Sophie is very nice too. We have a few folks who are very proud of their own webinar skills. That is awesome. I will say, I'm not going to try to put an answer to this because obviously it's a very subjective question. This is not a true or false question in real life. People learn differently from webinars, and a lot of people just enjoy webinars in general. But I'll say myself personally, I hate webinars. I've never actually been able to learn from a webinar. And so when I started creating webinars for AFCPE, my entire goal was to make them webinars that I, as someone who doesn't like webinars, could learn from. And these are the tips that I'm going to be sharing with you guys today. So for all those many people who said true, what makes a webinar boring to you? What do you find boring about webinars? Poor speaker. No interaction. Crappy graphics. I totally agree with that. Too much text. Reading text from the screen. Having text read to me. Too long. Lack of enthusiasm. Voice mismatch with text. That's an interesting one. No story, no conversation. Yeah, your goal, I believe, as a webinar presenter should be engaging as much as possible with your audience. And it's hard to do. You know, I'm looking at a computer screen just like you guys are. So you really have to put time and energy and effort into doing so. Okay, so I'm going to start with my teaching philosophy. And I will say, there is no one right answer when it comes to a teaching philosophy, but you do need to figure out what your philosophy of teaching is, because that is going to dictate how you teach. Okay? A lot of people don't put a lot of thought into how they're going to present their webinars and what drives them to present their webinars. And so you don't have a very cohesive vision. So like I said, there's no right or wrong answer, but here's mine. My teaching philosophy is it's the student's job to be open to learning, and my job is everything else. And you'll see that when I teach. I put hours and hours and hours of work into every webinar I create, because to me, it's my job to make my webinars engaging, to make them interesting, to make them easy to follow and fun to learn from. All of that is what makes my webinars hopefully entertaining. I have higher attendance than almost any other webinar presenter we have. And so I like to think that is proof of concept right there. Now, you may not have the same philosophy. I know a lot of college professors' philosophy is, my job is to convey knowledge, and it's the student's job to learn it. That is okay. Everybody's got their own passions, their own interests, and their own approaches. But you need to figure out what your approach is. Okay? So, practicalities. What are the 3 components of a webinar? Can anyone guess even one component of a webinar? Slide content. I'm going to call that visuals. And the content, absolutely. Learning objectives, I count that as part of the content. And interaction, I'm going to go ahead and count that as the third component, which is the presentation. So the 3 components of webinars are content, the visuals, that's the slide, the content's the knowledge, the presentation is the speaker. That is the person who's actually speaking. Okay? And yeah, crafting a learning experience overall is really important, and it takes all 3, especially with webinars, to do that. So let's talk with content. Let's start with that. And to write excellent content, you really have to understand the audience you're teaching. And so the first step is, what are the 3 learning styles? Many of you are AFCs, so hopefully this is a really easy one. Visual is 1. Auditory, tactile, which is also called kinesthetic. Excellent job, guys. Visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. What are some ways that you can teach people with who are visual learners in a webinar, if at all possible? So how can you teach visual learners in a webinar? Now the slides, that's part of it. What else? Pretty slides, good images, excellent. Okay, videos if you have them, excellent. All these are excellent answers. Okay, auditory. What can you do with the webinar for auditory learners? Okay, you're using your voice, conversation, interaction. You also, if you really are trying to be as effective as possible, you want to try excellent modulating your voice. You want to change your tone. You want to make it interesting to listen to you. Also, you want to integrate storytelling. Kinesthetic learners, really, really hard to do with webinars. How can you catch those kinesthetic learners? Interaction, yeah. Okay, chat box. Chat box is your friend. Ask questions, get responses. If you have handouts prior to, that is awesome. I actually did dabble in handouts and found them not super effective with webinars, but if you can make them work, go for it. I think that would be an amazing way to incorporate interaction in webinars. If you have a webinar platform that allows for interaction and activities within the webinar, that is great too, okay? So here are some of the basics. Now, you'll notice there's quite a bit of text on this slide. Raise your hand if you feel like there's too much text on this slide. Okay. I'm realizing with this many people in here, it's hard to see the raised hand function. We're going to talk a little bit in the next slide about the difference between PowerPoints for in-person presentations and PowerPoints for webinars. They are not the same thing. Okay. So with visual, again, you want to use sufficient text for the visual learners. That means they actually have to be able to understand what goes on in the webinar from the text, because visual learners don't learn very effectively from hearing. So you can't just talk. You have to let them be able to see the page as well. You need to incorporate compelling visuals. You know, this is a really nifty, pretty picture. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to use it. I've had it for a while. You want to vary your slide format. If you have all the slides that look exactly the same, especially the same text on the same slide, it gets really monotonous very quickly. You want to speak with passion. You want to speak as if you're engaging the audience. You know, even if I'm just in there talking about the slide, it feels a little bit like a story because I'm really engaged, and you can tell. Passion can absolutely cover up a lot of flaws in a poor presenter. They're really excited what they're talking about. The audience is going to give them a lot of leeway. For kinesthetic learners, you really want to maximize your interactivity as much as possible. So you want to use that chat box and incorporate games and activities as much as you can. Okay. So, true or false? You can use the same slides for in-person training as a webinar. I feel like I just gave you the answer, so this should be a really easy question to answer. Whole lot of falses. Okay. Yeah, they are not the same. So, let's talk about why. When you're in person, You as a teacher are in fact part of the visual component. So just you being there helps visual learners. And so one thing you need to worry about is if the PowerPoints are so visual they distract from the teacher, then they're actually distracting from the main point of information. So it is important to cater to visual learners in-person slides, and you should have slides if you're not going to do handouts. I'm personally much more of a handout person when I do in-person trainings. But in general, the goal of an in-person PowerPoint is to support the presenter and not overwhelm the presenter. In a webinar, the slides are the main visual component. In fact, they're pretty much the only visual component outside the chat box. Okay, and there's no kinesthetic component to webinar unless you build one in, and that's part of the slides as well. So especially with a webinar, if you do not have compelling slides, you do not have a compelling webinar. And I have seen some webinars, really, really great presenters, really interesting topic, and they have nothing but text on a blank page for 30 pages, and people just tune out. Unless there's somebody who's really engaged in the topic, a lot of people just tune out. So, how many topics should you cover in a webinar? I have a 3. I have 3. Not a lot of certainty. Okay. You know what, guys? I'm going to totally go with Ashley here. 1. If you have multiple topics, then you're pulling people in different directions. So this webinar, we're going to talk about a lot of different aspects of webinars, but it's all about webinars. So it's one topic. And that's really important because it's more important to go deep than to go shallow. So I have example. I'm not sure if you're asking for an example. The example here is we have just one topic. Now, I think a lot of people who put down multiple topics really were just doing one topic on their webinar and they didn't think about it. So for example, if you're doing an ethics webinar, you cover a lot of different things about ethics, but it's still about ethics. But I'll give you an example of something that was a terrible idea that was pitched to me. I won't say by who, but somebody who wanted to have me do a presentation at a training. He's like, I feel like they'd be really interested in credit and in communication. Summer, could you do a presentation that does both? And I'm like, no, I can't, because they have nothing to do with each other. Okay, so again, you want to have one topic and deep dive. Don't try to be everything for everyone. Your goal for a webinar is to be as concrete as possible. And you will find that the more specific you are, the more interest there is. There is a ton of interest, say, for example, in special needs planning. There's even more interest in ABLE accounts or special needs trusts, because that way they know they're going to get a lot more information on one key area, and it's going to go a lot deeper than what they would get just from an overview presentation. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, we have some consensus. So, true or false? Understanding your topic is more important than understanding your audience. I am so glad to see these answers. It is false, but I do agree with the people that say both matter. They do both matter. You should not go in on something you don't understand at all. Let me tell you, that's a really embarrassing webinar to do. But your audience is critical, and it's an often overlooked part of creating trainings in general. If you're going to be training experts, you need to go in more depth, and you have to make sure that you understand every aspect of the topic you're teaching. Okay? And if you're going to be teaching someone who's new to the game, you have to really tailor, exactly, you have to tailor your presentation to the audience. Thank you, Peter, that's perfect. Okay, so you want to make sure that you know who your audience is in advance, and you are prepared to work with them, and that you know how to tailor your presentation to work with them. So, choosing a topic. As I mentioned, you should only have one topic in a webinar. Okay. Oh, Jerry makes an excellent point. Understanding your learners is making a distinction between training adults and children. If you have ever taught high school kids, even high school kids who are quote-unquote problem kids, It is so much different than teaching it with adults. And in fact, as long as you connect with your audience, with the youth, it's actually really fun because they soak up knowledge like a sponge. Adults are actually a lot harder. You have to really work harder to keep them engaged. Kids, especially teenagers, are used to learning, to sitting in a classroom to learn. I have a question. So one topic rule applies to in-person training. I actually don't feel like it does. In-person trainings can be longer, much longer, without really losing track of the audience. And they can be on a varied topic because you can build in breaks in between each topic you teach. It's really hard to build in breaks into a webinar without everybody just going away for a drink and then just never coming back. Okay, that's one of the reasons why after the ASCP ethics webinar, I am never doing a 2-hour webinar again. 1 hour or maybe 90 minutes I think is going to be my limit. Only present on a topic that you have fully, oh, somebody keeps unmuting themselves. So please stay muted. Only present on a topic that you have fully mastered, okay? Best topics are specific. Again, I've seen a million topics on communication, okay? That is, you know, really a great topic. But if you've already taken a communication webinar, why would you take another one? Wouldn't you be more interested in something about a specific part of communication that you really want to learn about? If you're going to repeat a topic, that's why you want to look for a new angle. That's why we're trying to make all of our webinars as concrete as possible. I have a question. Can we get a copy of this presentation? Yes. If you are here and you signed up more than 5 minutes before this webinar, you will automatically get the slides mailed to you along with a link to the evaluation, which we'll get to later. The other thing is people are really lousy at creating descriptions for the webinars so that people actually want to come to them. So every time I see a webinar title that has 10 words in it or more, I'm like, wow, nobody's going to want to attend that webinar. Because if you can't compress the title down to 4 or 5 words at most, well, then how much are we going to believe that you can compress the information down to a really interesting and effective 1-hour webinar? So titles should be ideally 3 or 4 words, no more than 5 or 6 at most. A description should be 2 to 3 sentences at most, and you want to make it sound interesting and engaging. Okay, if you can get it in 1 sentence, you're a rock star, and you should run with it. That is a great skill to have. Any questions on topic or audience? Don't bury the lead. Yes, you want to start with the best point. All right, visuals. This is the part that I think you're going to get the most out of, simply because visuals are an area where many, 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 many people struggle with webinars. It's possibly the most difficult part of webinars to do. I actually spend more time on the visuals than I do on content by like a factor of 10. So I can create content for a webinar in a day, but the visuals for this webinar took 3 weeks. Now, not 3 weeks, 8 hours a day, but I also am not actually super visually creative, so I can only do a little bit at a time. So, what are some common mistakes people make with slide visuals? Too busy, too many images, good point. No color, too complicated. Don't balance visual and text. Too many words, and then they read the slides. Just throwing in something because it's cool. I actually, to be honest, I did that once in this webinar. I'll point it out. I'm a little embarrassed, but I just love that picture and I couldn't use it anywhere else. Too much information, nothing to do with the topic. Don't relate to the words. Totally makes sense. Okay. You actually are missing almost all the things that actually have to do with the graphics themselves. Okay, so let me go ahead and give you some examples. Not including any pictures, that doesn't work. Too many pictures can also be a problem. Low quality pictures. Who here has seen one of those really old Word 98 clip arts that's been super stretched and is pixelated and is really hard to even look at without cringing? Yeah, I see some yeses. Okay. I'm glad that Jerry brought up the point of copyright. I'll get to that in a second. But yes, those clip arts are awful. And I think a lot of them, because you can't even find those clip arts anymore. I've tried. I was going to put that in as a bad art example. They don't exist anymore. But I think it's because a lot of people use old slide templates over and over again and they don't update them. So that's another thing. Don't do that. Pixelated images. So images that are too small quality and have been overstretched or stretched in one direction, not the other. Has anybody ever seen like one of those things where it's like supposed to be a ball and it's clearly stretched into a rectangle because it's been stretched just one way, not the other? Not using cropping. Okay, cropping is a way to shape pictures without the stretching. And not having a visual theme. Okay, the theme is actually, it's valuable, and you can actually cover a lot. Cover up a lot with a theme that really works visually cohesively. Clip art could be great to use ironically, but yeah. I guess in a humor context, you could find a use for old clip art, but today, it's a tough call. So going back to theme, I'm going to show you a few themes that I have used. So this is a theme that I used for the ethics webinar. In fact, this is also the theme that I use for the webinar review presentations that I do. You'll see I like this one as a kind of, I'm trying to go with a monochrome look. I wanted something that was nice and a little bit generic so it could be used across different PowerPoints if I needed to, or different webinars if I needed to. And it also worked really well with the word cloud that I found for ethics. Okay. Here's what I did for Christmas, or sorry, for the holiday season. For the holiday webinars that you guys see, I did it for CFPB, and I'll be doing it again this December. So if you didn't have a chance to see that one, it was not open to the public. So you'll see this one's bright, and it's colorful, and there's a lot of reds and warm colors, and pictures of food. I think I mentioned you get food in an awful lot of pictures. And here's the one that I'm using for this webinar. I actually focused my theme. Oh, I have a question on colors. I'm glad you actually pointed that out. Cups of tea don't really have a lot to do with pencils, but I actually decided intentionally I wanted to show what you could do with a color theme. And here my colors are blue and yellow, which are ASCP's colors, and green, because that's a mix of blue and yellow. So I really tried to shape all of my slides around that color theme so it feels cohesive, even if you don't notice it. Very few people are going to consciously notice that all of these colors are complementary, but it really ties it all together in their heads. It helps them pay attention. Okay. I have a question. Is this Canva or homemade? These are semi-homemade. AFCPE had a graphic designer create the template, of which the only thing that still exists from the template that was given to me is that little AFCP logo and the shapes of the squares around the pencils. Everything else has been changed. But you can use a lot of templates and then just heavily modify them. So any other questions we have about these? I like these. Making your own photos. That actually takes care of the copyright issue. That's perfect. People learn a lot with a cup of tea. Well, especially when they're just conveniently perfectly colored to go with the AFCPE logo colors. All right. So let's talk about great visuals. This baseball right here, that is a terrible visual, and you would not believe the work I had to go into to making it look that ugly, because the sites where I get pictures from don't really have ugly pictures. It was a little bit more of a nightmare than you'd think. So try to avoid the common manipulation mistakes. So again, this ball was just stretched in one direction, not the other, so it's a rectangle or an oval instead of a circle. It's been overexpanded. You can see the pixelation around the ball. You'll notice that you get pixelation in slideshow that you may not get when you're actually when you're working on the slides. It's because the slideshow, the slides are slightly larger. So you'll always want to test a presentation in the slideshow before you run with it. You might find there's some pixelation. You might want to get a higher quality version of that picture. I don't know how you could throw this ball, much less how a bat could hit this ball. And again, cropping. It is better to crop sometimes than to shrink an image, because that way you can bring the image down to just the most important part of the picture. Okay. Yeah, screenshotting graphics and graphs can do this too, because again, you're trying to take something that is screen sized and shift it to whatever space you have available, and that doesn't always work. So do not mix clip art with photography. And there is actually some quite nice clip art out there these days. I don't use it. It's not my visual aesthetic. But if you like something a little bit more cartoony, there is good clip art. Don't have text-only slides unless imagery would be distracting. So for anybody who actually saw AFCPE ethics, you'll notice there are a lot of slides that were just the scenarios with no images. I did that intentionally because I want people to focus on the scenario, not on whatever image I could come up with. Also, most of the scenarios were awful, so I didn't really want to have a picture attached to them. And actually, that gets brings back to using images of people. You should not create a horrible scenario and put a picture of a person on it. That's considered inappropriate. And even models for free pictures don't really want to be associated with something awful. And that's just to be polite. Okay, I'll get to more about that in a second. The other thing is you want to make sure you incorporate color, unless you're intentionally going for a monochrome effect, in which case you have to be very, very careful with the pictures that you select so that they're still visually interesting while being low color. And then proofread, proofread, proofread. How many times do you think I've read this PowerPoint before I signed off on it being okay? Take a guess. A lot. A lot's good. Thank you, Susan. Way too many. The very beginning to end, I actually probably looked at it 4 times. However, every time I opened it up, I started from the beginning and reread it to make sure that everything was accurate. Okay, so the number of times probably is closer to the 20s or 30s for some of the earlier slides, and for some of the later ones, it was probably only the 4 or 5 times. But if you're not sure about your proofreading skills, you can have someone else look at it too. So I have an English degree, and I fall back on it. Yeah, you want to have someone else look at your slides if you can. Oh, and Kimberly makes an excellent point. You can read it out loud, and that's a good way to catch typos if you're not really great at looking at catching them when you read them. The other thing is, if it's at all possible, try to finish at least a week or 2 early so that you can take a break from it and then come back with fresh eyes. If I can come back after a week, I have far more success catching typos than I would otherwise. Okay. All right, images of people. Incorporate diversity if possible, because you never know who's watching, and you want to be able to, embrace everybody who's attending. Do not denigrate anybody. That should be an obvious one. Okay. Do not make fun of groups. Do not use humor at the expense of other people. Okay. Visuals, let's do some actual resources. So by the way, we're talking about graphics that have nothing to do with the content. I've had that picture of that elephant for months, and I love it, and it's a beautiful, magical picture, and yet there's no way I can use it for any topic that I can find. So I was really excited for the chance to actually use it here. Oh, Jerry has an interesting suggestion about having a text-to-speech program read the PowerPoint out loud to you. That can make things easier to catch because you might be reading what you expect to see on the page. So, great free-to-use images, and I've not used Unsplash, but that's another recommendation in the chat box. Pixabay and Pexels are both really good resources. Pexels has a few more images because they frankly keep stealing them from Pixabay, but Pixabay has a far, far more effective search feature, and so I tend to use Pixabay more. Both of them, almost all the images are allowed to be used for commercial use, so that you can even plaster some of these on the side of a bus. Ones with the people are often only allowed for editorial use, but webinars do count as editorial use, okay, because you're not using it to sell anything. PowerPoint templates or the slide templates, obviously PowerPoint is an option. Google Slide has some templates. I find them very challenging to use, so I probably won't myself. PowerPoint slides are a lot easier to modify, and there are more of them. Slidescarnival.com is actually just one lady, I think it's a lady, who creates slides for the heck of it. And she has dozens, and some of them are really boring, and some of them are just amazingly beautiful. So I recommend checking it out if you really have a tough time creating your own templates. And then if you like the idea of manipulating pictures, or you want to be able to do something that you normally would require Photoshop but don't want to pay for it because Photoshop is incredibly expensive, the program I use for all of my photo manipulations is the GNU Image Manipulation Program, which has the incredibly unfortunate name of GIMP. But yes, GIMP is awesome, and it's GIMP.org, and it's completely free. And it does, as far as I can tell, almost everything Photoshop does. And the last version of GIMP is actually surprisingly user-friendly. It used to be not very, but now it's getting much more user-friendly as they keep updating it. Okay. Point out from Jerry that federal agencies maintain public or photo images that are in the public domain and can be interesting. That is true. I have been told, although I have never really confirmed this, that anything created by the federal government is by definition in the public domain because it was created with taxpayer dollars. So Jerry says yes. So you might want to research that. If I have a couple of people saying it's true in the comments. So that's something else that you can do to get pictures. So, any questions on visuals or any other suggestions on visuals? I have DVids. I'm not sure what DVids is, but it sounds cool. And XRegulator, which is another government site, I'm guessing. Any other suggestions you guys have? I did find quite a few other sites that had free images, but most of them didn't have a really awesome search function. And when I'm trying to find pictures, I need really great search capability. Okay. Canva. My understanding of Canva, I've never used it, is that it's a site that has a lot of pre-built templates and that you can just modify in Canva that can be used for posters and presentations. The only thing I can speak for with the Canva is we've had one presenter use it in the past, and the file sizes were enormous and were not compatible with WebEx. So, you know, that one, if you can get it to work, that is awesome, and it is very pretty. But I have to admit, I find it kind of challenging. Oh, thanks for the update information on DVids. Cool. PhotoFile, I guess, is another website for visuals. So thank you for all of these suggestions, and feel free to keep contributing them in the chat box as we go. And now we're going to talk about presentation. By the way, before we get to the end, how many CEUs do you get for this webinar? Yes. So you see how it says 0 and none? The advantage of that is that we don't have to go for a full hour if we finish early. Okay, so we go until we are done, which will probably take less than an hour at this rate. So embrace the freedom of CEU free and enjoy the knowledge. Oh, but I had a question from Starlet. Is this webinar required to present in the future? It is. And if you're already scheduled this year, which we're pretty much maxed out this year, then no, I'm not going to retroactively require it. But if you want to do an AFCPE webinar in the future, this is required. Also, keep in mind, if you want to do webinars in the future, I do require slides a minimum of a month in advance, okay? And ideally earlier. So just if you're interested, be prepared to, you know, prep accordingly. So, oh, also, if you do want to do webinars in the future, I am the contact to speak to. So you have my contact information. Feel free to give me a call to discuss. True or false? Body language is more important than spoken words. True. And I have a question for Gary. Is there an AFCPE standard template for webinars? The one I'm using now, the base of this is a template that we've used internally. I see no reason why you guys couldn't use it if you wanted to use ours. But I would, I guess, have to confirm with Rachel since she's the one who makes that call. I have true, false, sometimes true, true. So we have mostly a consensus of true. It is true. But guess what you do not have available to you in a webinar? Yeah. Oh, I have a question. Is my contact information sfred@afcp.org? That is true. That is accurate. Thank you. Yeah, you have no body language in a webinar. You have nothing to work from except your voice. So think how expressive you want your voice to be to replace all of that body language that you were conveying before. And if you could see me, if I had my webinar, my webcam on right now, you would see I am actually using my whole body as I'm teaching right now, even though you can't see it. I am gesturing just to this screen in front of me, okay? That is just like when you're on the phone and you're smiling, people can tell. It changes your voice. And so right now, my body language is helping to change my voice because my voice is part of my body. My body is part of my voice. So what are some common verbal mistakes? Think about presentations of that. Yes, saying a lot and speaking in a monotone is absolutely one of them. I had one person, oh, I think the person was a really nice person as a human being, but I think after the 5th or 6th time I think it was a she, started saying you couldn't focus on anything else. You started counting the uhs. Talking too fast, thank you, Sylvia, that's my problem. My biggest problem is I talk too fast. Talking too slow is less common, but it can be a problem too. Saying right a lot, or you know what I mean? Yeah. All of those verbal tics are absolutely big ones. Using slang can be a challenge. Saying like, yep, that's another one of those verbal tics. One thing, somebody mentioned misinformation and saying my bad. One thing I really drives me a little bit nuts is when you panic over a mistake. I tell you right now, everybody at some point in their life is going to make a mistake at some point while they're teaching. It's just inevitable. Nobody is 100% perfect. And so the way to respond to that is keep going. Yes, thank you, Brian. You have to just keep going. You have to let it go, power forward, and thank you for the Toastmasters call out, and just keep going. One of the really great ways to respond to a mistake, or even if it's not a mistake, even if you're forgetting something, is a really common mistake. Okay, so if you've forgotten something, just pause. I'll tell you right now, students just think you're being thoughtful. When you pause because you're panicking, it comes across as, I'm being a very deliberate speaker. Okay? Take advantage of that. Pause as much as you need to. As you get more experience, you'll be pausing less, but those pauses can still have impact. I will sometimes pause just for impact. By the way, here's a pro tip for those who are teaching in person. Louder is not the way to catch everybody's attention. You want to go softer. The softer you are, the more impact your words have. Okay? It doesn't work quite as well in webinars, but it's a great tool when you're teaching in classes. Okay? And a good point. Pause can seem like a long time when it's just a couple of seconds, but your brain moves really fast. You can really take advantage of those seconds. Jerry says it's only effective to whisper if people are straining to hear you. It depends on how much you use your body to push those whispers. Okay, any other suggestions or comments for things that are common verbal mistakes? I have a question. Do I ever need an external microphone? The largest group I've ever done without a microphone was 80. And I'm trying to think if I've ever actually done a larger group than that in person. We will, by the way, be doing ethics at Symposium as a pre-symposium workshop. Depending on the size of the room, I may need to use a microphone then, but normally I'm a pretty loud speaker. Oh, I've been told that participants get frustrated when you stress because you're behind. Oh yeah, if you are really failing to pace properly, that's a mistake. Don't communicate that to everyone, okay? You really want to make sure that you keep an eye on the clock and that you learn to pace yourself and speed up if necessary. Jerry points out the value of a dedicated mic during a webinar. I'm on a headset right now, and I think that does improve things enormously. Okay. I have wanting to use microphone if available for the hearing impaired. I am really loud, so that may or may not be helpful, but yeah, it's good to know, especially if you're not really loud, a microphone can be very valuable. And when you're behind, it is stressful, but don't need to communicate that stress to the audience. You just need to pick up the pace. All right, so let's talk about the verbal. Voice control, be passionate. Oh, excellent point from Kimberly. It's been a great conversation. Let's move ahead. You sometimes do need to cut off your audience, and that's something else too. It's important in live, especially in a live training, to really control the audience so that you can move forward when you need to. But when you're doing webinars, and also pretty much valuable for real life presentations in person, let your passion shine through, change your volume and tone, use pauses for emphasis. Try not to end sentences with a rising tone. That's becoming more and more common, I've noticed, and I don't know why, but I know I do it too. So it's something I think in the language that's starting to affect how people talk. If you forget something, do not flip out, do not bluster, do not call attention to it, just move on. Okay? Take a pause if you need to, and just skip ahead. I will also say, if you've ever been a storyteller, I'm telling you right now, when you're trying to remember what great-grandma Edna's name is, you are slowing everybody down and you're killing your story. Forget the name. Move ahead. Presentation tips. Really spend extra time on a strong start. And thank you, Brian. Nobody does know what you missed if you don't point it out. I want to say I probably spend 25 to 30% of the time that I spend creating webinars on picking my true-false pictures and my trivia pictures, because those are the backbone of the webinars I do. Those are the slides that come up again and again. I also, whenever I'm creating a presentation, spend a ton of time on the start and a ton of time on the end, because people remember those most. It's the rule of primacy and recency. It's what they've heard first and last is what really sticks. Don't just read the slides. If you're just going to read the slides are there. The audience can read it themselves. Stick to key details. Again, you don't want to get too much in the weeds because you're going to lose the people who are not interested in that much depth. You also will probably mess up your pacing then. And again, because I cannot say it enough, do not get stuck on your mistakes. Do not. Just keep moving. Whenever possible, use storytelling. I am fortunate in the sense that I have a family that is just really fiscally unsound. And so I have lots of stories about financial disasters, and I use them constantly. That really helps you connect with audiences. If you're talking about a specific topic, however that has impacted you can make a huge difference in how much you've connected to your audience. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Nobody wants to listen to a paragon. Nobody wants to listen to somebody who's perfect, because we're all flawed human beings, and we learn best from someone who we can relate to. So be vulnerable. Be honest. Let yourself look like a fool sometimes. And then, when you can, incorporate humor, but be careful. One of the things that I like to say is to use the golden rule or the dinner table rule, which is you don't talk religion, you don't talk politics, and you don't make fun of anybody. Okay? Yeah, nothing sexist, nothing racial. The only person I'll make fun of is myself and my fictional family members, because it's really myself, because you don't know them. Okay? So again, whenever you're using humor, be careful, but if you have no humor, that is going to be a really, really long slog. Okay? Any questions, comments, suggestions? I like Brian's suggestions here. Okay. True or false? Evaluations are vital to webinar improvement. Yeah, very true. Okay. How many times in the last month have you been asked to evaluate a webinar that you've seen? One each time, every time. That's awesome. Are they our webinars or are they other webinars? Others, both. So one thing that not every webinar I've attended has an evaluation option. And I feel like evaluation is really important, and it's something that you're going to be seeing definitely from AFCP in the future. In fact, you'll be getting a request along with the slides to fill out an evaluation form for this one, and I would really request that you do so. Okay? Because you absolutely need to know where you could be improving to continue to improve. So, practice is vital to webinar improvement. Oh, we have a question. Will presenters receive feedback from the evaluations? They haven't, but they could. Presenters should contact me if they're interested. Okay, true or false? Practice is vital to webinar improvement. Okay, I have yeses, which I'm going to count as true, and a lot of trues. Yes, obviously practice makes perfect, or at least makes a much better webinar. So, you need to figure out how you yourself can work on improving your webinar skills. And only you know where you could use work. I, for example, know unequivocally I speak too fast. And I think I've killed most of my verbal tics, but there's still a few out there. So I keep working. I'm always going to keep working on my webinars. I want to make them prettier. I want to make my presentation better. But until I know the areas to grow from, then I don't know where to work on. So first off, if you have the option of outside evaluations, grab it with both hands. But you also can evaluate yourself. Listen to your webinars, listen to a recording from the webinar. I don't know about you, but hearing my own voice makes me cringe like nails against a chalkboard. So I have to admit, I have not done this personally because I can be a hypocrite. But I really pay attention to my webinars when I'm actually teaching. I really pay attention as I go. And hopefully you do not have the same issue I have and can totally take the much easier route of listening to the recording. You can also get feedback from webinar attendees. And one thing that you have to remember, people like to be nice. Okay, the average person does not like to say something critical. So you really have to emphasize that I want to hear what you have to say. Okay, I want to know where I could get better. Okay, you really, really have to emphasize that. And yes, feel free to critique me right here in the chat box if you want, but you can also do it in my evaluation, which is nice and anonymous. Once you identify the areas that you want to improve, create a plan. Okay, so first off, don't try to fix everything all at once. You're not going to be able to, and you're just going to get frustrated. Pick one area that you can grow. I think I've heard them called growing edges once. I like that. So just an edge where you can just get a little bit better over time. Create specific tasks or goals that will help you there. If, like me, you do webinars partially for a living, you have lots of opportunities, but for other folks, you might have to generate opportunities. And then, of course, you want to make your goals SMART. Let's do a really quick test for all your AFCs. What does S stand for in SMART? Specific, excellent. What's M stand for? Measurable, good. What does A stand for? Okay. Oh, we have a little more variety there. So the A is usually attainable, but these are all various versions of attainable or actionable. Jerry clearly has forgotten his AFC years. All right, R is realistic. It's interesting. R is the one that usually has multiple answers. Oh, I saw relevant. Thank you. I'm going to give you a story about relevant, which is one of the reasons why I like it versus realistic. First off, I consider attainable and realistic to be the same thing. I feel like that might be why A is being shifted to include actionable. But for me, relevant comes from this. I've always wanted to learn a foreign language. So I studied French, studied Spanish, studied German. Do you want to guess how many words I speak of any of those languages? Take a guess. Pretty much none. I can probably order from Taco Bell if there's a menu in front of me. So clearly, I really am struggling with this despite the fact that I love the idea of learning a foreign language. But you know what? The longest time I lived in Great Falls, Montana. Do you know how many opportunities I have to speak French in Great Falls, Montana? Pretty much none. So on the other hand, I bet if I went to France for a year, I'd learn French pretty quickly. Okay, so for me, I like the fact that some goals are just not relevant. I'm not failing because I'm a failure. It's just that goal does not apply to my life. And so maybe it's just not the right goal for me at that time. At some point it might be one, but now it's not. So that's a good reason for R for relevant. T is timely, time to find, timely. Thank you, Leslie. I'm glad you liked it. So yeah, T is timely. One of my favorite quotes is, goals are just dreams with deadlines. And I always like to add, if you don't have a deadline, it's just a dream. Okay? So you want to make your goals SMART, and you want to make them doable. Big, giant goals are really, really hard to actually achieve, and failure makes you frustrated. Ooh, I like adding ER, evaluate and revise to. Excellent addition. Okay? So figure out a goal, and then practice. Practice, 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 practice. Find opportunities to practice. Do a webinar with us. Do a webinar with someone else. Do trainings in person. You'll learn a lot of skills there too that sometimes will translate to webinars. Okay. The other thing I want to mention is how often do you need to repeat something before something that's really important? How often do you want to repeat it? Minimum times. Okay. So the more the merrier, yes, but 3 times is what you want to repeat something. So just keep that in mind. But before we get to the last slide, what are your goals? So for everybody here, yes, I agree. There's no substitute for experiencing teaching. Okay. So what are your goals to become a better presenter, better webinar speaker? Okay, improve is a great goal, but it's not necessarily a SMART in all capital letters goal. So what are your SMART goals? What are your next steps? I guess these goals can be kind of long to type out. More pretty pictures, communicating better, working on tone and voice, improving delivery via voice. Okay, do you guys have ideas on how you're going to achieve these yet? How are you going to practice this? Better visuals. I like the people calling out the pretty pictures. I really feel like pictures are underrated. Oh, I like that one. Pause after each sentence for a second or two and practice 3 to 5 times out loud. So here's a question for those who practice their webinars in advance. Do you find that as you keep repeating the same presentation, you kind of lose some of that spontaneity, or do you feel like it absolutely continues to improve your presentations? Okay, I see a lot of, by the way, very interesting goals out here. Okay, so a lot of folks gets better, improves things. Excellent. I find the 5th time I say a presentation in a row, it kind of starts sounding a little bit flat. So I have to really make an effort when I'm doing repetition to keep building energy into it. Okay. Gosh, I love all of these different goals. I think they're awesome. Oh, and I love the idea of enrolling in an improv class. Okay. Oh, these are fantastic. All right. So going back to hearing everything 3 times, how many CEUs do you get for this webinar? Yes. So I'll tell you right now, please don't email me, ask me for what the code phrase is. There isn't one. All right. Storytelling classes can be very helpful. I really feel like if you have a large group of friends who are interested in this, you can actually create a storytelling group. That's something I've always wanted to do, but I haven't had enough people around me who are interested. But really, the value could be that you could each just come up with a little story. Stories, by the way, should be no more than 3 minutes tops, preferred no more than 1 minute when you're using them for teaching purposes. And then just tell your story to your friends and have them give feedback, and vice versa. Oh, I have a question. Do I have any pointers for someone who facilitates webinars with another person? I have never done that, so I'm going to go with no. But does anyone else have suggestions? That's a great question. Does anyone else ever facilitate webinars with other folks? And keep posting those suggestions while you have going up. Rehearse together. Excellent point. Practice ahead of time. Yeah, if you're not close with someone, because I've told stories with other people, the timing is really hard to do if you don't practice it. And it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. I generally don't teach often with other folks because I'm very high energy, and it can be kind of hard to find my energy. I think that's a good point by Jeff. Designate who's primary and who's secondary. Who's the person who will actually facilitate and control the flow of conversation, and whose job it is to step in and fill those gaps. Okay. All right. By the way, no webinars. No CEUs for the webinar. Do you have any questions? Any other thoughts? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I really, really enjoyed it. I love doing webinars, and I love education in general. That's my little happy zone. Oh, photo credits. For all the Pixabay and Pexels, we have a request on how to give photo credits. Pixabay and Pexels, you don't actually have to give photo credits. If you want to give photo credits, you usually can do so on the picture just underneath it or on top of it, okay? Ooh, we have a question. Does anybody purchase photos? I don't, but that's primarily because there's so many free, awesome ones out there. Will the slides be sent out? Yes, they'll be sent out today or tomorrow as soon as I can figure out how to get the recording link to work. I feel like we have some interest in continuing this as a discussion topic. I'm really trying to figure out if there's a way we could have something more interactive even than this. And so if you have any suggestions or ideas on how we can try that, let me know. But we're thinking about it and we're working on it. Thank you all for attending. It was a wonderful webinar. You can always reach me at sfred@ascpe.org or my phone number right there on the page, also on the website. So just, if you need anything, give me a call. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you all.